Holy Spirit. How many people heard the story of David and Goliath in Sunday school, or by your parents, or grandparents, or somebody? Only 3? Oh, right. So, I offer this to you to share with your children and your grandchildren, your nieces, nephews, and anybody else that gathers around. Tell them a story. Tell them this story. It's a great story. Now, the way my mother taught me in Sunday school in Edinburgh, Texas, at the First Christian Church, and she was a great Sunday school teacher, I'll tell you that. What I learned was the Israelites were in battle with the Philistines, and there was a great giant, Goliath, and little David, the shepherd boy, came out, and with his sling, killed the giant. And because of that, we know that God is on our side. Whoa. Now, the story of David and Goliath is a wonderful story. Goliath is a giant, likely over 6 feet tall, heavily armored, significant physical power, and intimidation over all the opponents. Now, what's going on here is the Israelites are on one side of the valley on the mountaintop, and on the other side are their enemies. Now, if either one would begin to come down the ridge into the valley, they'd be easily picked off by arrows. So they were caught on each side. And what happened was this giant, this huge fighter, came forth every day for over 40 days. And 40 days in the scriptures always means a long time. He just kept coming out every day saying, let's not fight. Let's just find one person to come out and fight me. Well, what would you do if you saw a giant, a powerful person who said to you, fight me? Maybe let's go to court. Maybe let's have a battle of any sort. Now, all of the Israelites, all their army, the men listened to that and shrunk back, because here was this huge warrior, extensive experience in traditional combat, heavy weapons, and armor. They didn't have anything like that. They did not believe they could take this on and survive. Now, a traditional way of fighting was hand-to-hand combat, swords, long staves, and that's why the traditional way of beating was to have armor and bronze helmets and greaves around their legs, kind of like a soccer player, right? Protecting them from all of this hand-to-hand combat. Nobody knew what to do. Now, let's remember what David was. David was the youngest child of 8 boys. Jesse was a father. And he spent his time all day with the sheep, with his father's sheep. He was alone. All alone. His brothers were out doing big things. 3 of them in the army, others doing things that kept them away from home, but he had to take care of the sheep. Alone. His older brothers would never deign to come and be with him out in the wilderness taking care of the sheep. Now, if you are aware, we have goats that come and right? Now, we don't have bankers going out there helping herd the goats, or lawyers, right? Or any other profession. But these goat herders are important. But nevertheless, they are not the top of the food chain. David, in his family, was not that important. In fact, during this war, Jesse sent David every week with food for his 3 older brothers. And they would always treat him like a sheep herder. The younger brother, what are you doing here again? Give us the food and get out of here. Let us take on the real work of protecting our land. So for this long period of time, Goliath is standing there, intimidating everybody. And in comes David with food, comes to Saul, the king, and says, what's going on out there? And just at that time, Goliath starts giving his speech. Come here and fight me. If you win, we will be your slaves, but if you lose, you will be our slaves. David looked at him and said, what's going on here? Why is this giant scaring everybody? Now, what did David see when he saw that? What had David been doing? David had been protecting the flock of sheep in the wilderness, not here on a hillside in Laguna Beach, but in the wilderness, where lions and bears would come and try to take one of the sheep with them. He had to protect the sheep from all of those wilderness dangers. And he learned how to do that. He was ready whenever there would be a lion or a bear come up. And he saw this lion or bear that they called Goliath. And he said, why don't we take care of him? And he went around to various people in the army and said, what's going on here? And his brothers heard him and said, get out of here. You don't know what you're doing. Go back to herding the sheep. And David then, having no other recourse, went to Saul and said, I will take care of this. I will take care of this. God is on my side. He is on our side. Why do we let these people who aren't godly intimidate us? And Saul said, why do you think you can do this? And he said, I have killed lions and bears with my bare hands. I know how to deal with this. And Saul, having nothing else, no other plan, said, well, fine, come in. Let me put my armor on you. Let me put my helmet on you. And then, here's my sword. And David looked at it. They put it on and he couldn't even walk. Right? He couldn't even walk. And he said, this is not the way I'm going to defeat Goliath. And he gave him back to Saul and said, thank you very much. Now, David goes out. Saul comes forward. And did you hear that Saul has his shield bearer come before him? And Saul moves slowly forward. David stoops in the valley at the stream and picks up 5 stones, puts them in his shepherd's pouch, and comes forward. And there you shouting back and forth to each other about how terrible it's going to be. And David, in a second, whips out a stone, puts it in his sling, throws it right into the most vulnerable place for the giant, in his forehead. Goliath falls down. David goes over, picks up Goliath's sword, and chops off his head. Now, what is a wonderful story for young children. young children who see any adult as a giant, knowing that they are not as vulnerable as they think they might be. But let's talk about what might have happened here. Now, here's young David thrown out into the wilderness, protecting the sheep. And he is taught from his childhood to have this relationship with a higher power, with God, who is in charge, who has a plan for you, who will protect you. And he begins to learn what he would have learned if he had been in the light infantry of the military. Now, the heavy infantry was all the big armor and all the big swords. The light infantry, guess what? Made up of arrows and slings. And the light infantry people learned how to use those slings to move projectiles, rocks, or pieces of metal at over 100 miles an hour. That's almost as fast as a Colt 45 bullet. That's what David used to kill the lions and the bears. Now, what happened was everybody was caught in a box. What we see, and what they saw was this, that the battle was about power and about military skill. And here was one who was huge in power, skilled in military prowess, and they believed they weren't as strong, as large, or as powerful. And they didn't know what to do. David did not see the same way. David saw it in a whole different way. He was a misfit, an underdog. And he had to use what he used before, which was his faith in God. Something is here that will protect me. His skill and his experiences. So when he came, he treated Goliath like just another lion or bear. And he knew how to handle them. It's simply pull out my sling, take a few rocks, sling it over there, he's gone. Now, this is not something you're going to tell a 4 or 5 year old, but how about a teenager? Do you remember being a teenager? Do words like misfit, outcast, underdog have any resonance with you? That's true for most teenagers. What do they need to know? They need to know that there's something more than themselves that cares about them. There is a power in the world that brought them into being that has a plan for them. And that plan is not like magic. It doesn't come from out of the sky. It comes from their experience, from their skills, and their beliefs. And they are all capable of bringing down giants. They're all capable of moving through, not ignoring that they are different, that others might call them misfits or underdogs or outcasts. But they can move with that and see the world in a different place, because that's what's uniquely valuable about every human being, is we don't see the world in the same way. But when we give up our own world, our own perception, our own faith, and our own experience and abilities, and fall into the common beliefs, then we're caught like all the armies of Saul, believing that we can't fight the giant. And the giant probably could not have been defeated if they tried to defeat him using his rules. But think for a moment. Every great thing in this world came about because somebody saw it differently. When we think about the American Revolution, just being a colony from England, people could complain about it, but until people said, we can do this differently, we have experience. We have a whole Native American tradition of how colonies can work together. They saw it differently. They were the outcasts. They were the underdogs. And you don't believe me, just go read the British military and political history and look at how they saw these colonies. Outcasts, underdogs. But we saw it differently. And this is what the story can tell us today. When we are afraid, chances are we're afraid because we're willing to believe that the opposition sets the rules that we have to follow. And when we recognize that we are different, we can see ourselves as outcasts, as underdogs, as misfits. We don't fit that. But because of our experience, because of our ability and our faith that there is something greater that will lead us and protect us, we can do marvelous things. Like David. Now, who needs to hear that story? Who needs to hear that story? Who in your family can value that story? And allow them to move forward in new ways, not being caught in the box, not being caught in the traditional way of being, but can recognize that they are uniquely loved by God and by you, and that you can see that they have the ability to bring down giants in ways that maybe they didn't know. Now, David not only is known as a giant killer, but he becomes the greatest king in Israel's history. That's a whole different story, a wonderful story. But he continues to be an outcast, a misfit, and an underdog all the way through his life. But this story is important to tell to children because it helps them see that they are not alone in this world of giants that walk around them every day. And also becomes a story for teenagers and for us. That it's not only okay to see ourselves as a misfit, an outcast, or an underdog. That is the place where we have the most power, is when we recognize that we are not the same as others. And that the Creator who has brought us into being has given us our unique sets of abilities, our experiences can bring to bear a different way of seeing, and our faith in ourselves and in God can help us create things that others can't even imagine. That, to me, is the power of this story. And that, to me, is the power of this congregation. For years, we have done the impossible. We have not only lived in the box. We have created possibilities for people that they could not imagine. And because of that, lives have been changed. Our challenge is to continue to see those impossible situations around us, to feel the pain, to recognize that others are not going to do it for us, but then to be open to possibilities and recognizing that our faith in God will bring us the solution as well as the victory against those things that we thought were impossible. Our challenge is to be willing to be a misfit, an outcast, an underdog, in the name of God. Thanks be to God.